Chapter 14, Guardian Saints. We were stopped by immigration about 100 miles this side of the New Mexico border. Maddie had warned me of this possibility, and we had all prepared for it as best as we could. Esperanza and Esteban were dressed about as American as you could get, without looking plain obnoxious. He had on jeans and an alligator t-shirt donated from some church on the east side where people gave you stuff that was entirely a cut above new to you. Esperanza was wearing purple culottes, a yellow t-shirt, and sunglasses with pink frames. She sat in the back seat with Turtle. Her long hair was loose, not braided, and as we sped down the highway it whipped around her shoulders and out the window, putting on a brave show of freedom that had nothing to do with Esperanza's life. Twice I asked if it was too much wind on her, and each time she shook her head. Every eastbound car on the highway was being stopped by the Border Patrol. The traffic was bottled up, which gave us time to get good and nervous. This kind of check was routine. It had not been set up for the express purpose of catching us, but it still felt that way. To all of us, I believe, I was frantic. I rattled my teeth, as Mama would say. There's this great place up ahead called Texas Canyon, I told them, knowing full well that none of us might make it to Texas Canyon. Esperanza and Esteban might not make it to their next birthday. Wait till you see it. It's got all these puffy-looking rocks, I chattered on. Turtle and I loved it. They nodded quietly. Then our turn came, and I threw back my head like a wealthy person, yanked that Cadillac into gear, and pulled up to the corrugated tin booth. A young officer poked his head in the car. I could smell his aftershave. "All U.S. citizens?" he said. "Yes," I said. I showed my driver's license. "This is my brother Steve and my sister-in-law." The officer nodded politely. "The kid yours or theirs?" I looked at Esteban, which was a stupid thing to do. "She's ours," Esteban said, without a trace of an accent. The officer waved us through. "Have a nice day," he said. After we had passed well beyond the checkpoint, Esteban started apologizing. "I thought it would be the most believable thing, since you hesitated." "Yeah, I did. You looked at me. I thought it might seem suspicious if I said she was yours. He might wonder why you didn't say it." I know, you're right. It's no problem. The only thing that matters is we made it through." It did bother me, though, just as it bothered me that Turtle was calling Esperanza Ma, which was a completely unreasonable thing to resent. I know, since Turtle called every woman Ma something. There was no way she could have managed Esperanza. We got out at the rest station in Texas Canyon. It turned out there weren't restrooms there, just picnic tables, so I took Turtle behind a giant marshmallow-shaped boulder. Ever since I found out she was 3 years old, we'd gotten very serious about potty training. When we came back, Esteban and Esperanza were standing by the guardrail looking out over the endless valley of boulders. A large wooden sign, which showed dinosaurs and giant ferny trees, and mountains exploding in the background, explained that this was the lava flow from a volcanic explosion long ago. Along with the initials and hearts scratching the sign with pocket knives, someone had carved "Repent." The setting did more or less put you in that frame of mind. There wasn't a bush or tree in sight, just rocks and rocks, sky and more sky. Esteban said this is what the world would have looked like if God had gone on strike after the second day. It was a peculiar notion, but then you had to consider Esteban's background with the teachers' union. He would think in those terms. They seemed uncomfortable out of the car, so we stayed on the move after that, driving down an endless river of highway. After my VW, driving Maddie's wide white car felt like steering a boat. Not that I had ever actually steered anything of that kind. Esteban and Esperanza didn't have proper driver's license, of course. That was the very least of what they didn't have. So to be on the safe side, I did all the driving. The first night we would try to go straight through, pulling over from naps when I needed to. Luann had made us a thermos of iced coffee. For the second night I told him I knew of a nice motor lodge in Oklahoma where we could most likely stay for free. Esteban and I talked about everything you can think of. He asked me if the alligator was a national symbol of the United States, because you saw them everywhere on people's shirts, just above the heart. Not that I know of, I told him. It occurred to me, though, that it might be kind of appropriate. He told me that the national symbol of the Indian people in Guatemala was the quetzal, a beautiful green bird with a long, long tail. I told him I had seen military macaws at the zoo, and wondered if the quetzal was anything like those. He said no. If you want to try to keep this bird in a cage, it died. Shortly after sunset, we left the interstate to take a 2-lane road that cut through the mountains and would take about 200 miles in New Mexico off your trip. I wished we'd keep New Mexico in and cut out 200 miles of Oklahoma instead. But of course, Oklahoma is where we were going. I had to keep reminding myself of that. For some reason, I had in the back of my mind that we were headed for Kentucky. I kept picturing Mama's face when we all pulled up in the driveway. I squinted and flashed my lights at a car coming towards us with its brights on. They dimmed. "Do you miss your home a lot?" asked Esteban. I know it's a stupid question, but does that make you tired? Being so far away from what you know? That's how I feel sometimes. That I would just like to crawl in a hole somewhere and rest. Go dormant like those toad frogs Maddie told us about. And for you, it's just that much worse. You're not even speaking your own language. He let out a long breath. I don't even know anymore which home I miss. Which level of home. In Guatemala City, I miss the mountains. My own language, not Spanish. Did you know that? I told him no, that I didn't. We are Mayan people. We speak 22 different Mayan languages. Esperanza and I speak to each other in Spanish because we come from different parts of the highlands. What's Mayan exactly? Mayans lived here in the so-called New World before Europeans discovered it. We're very old people. In those days we had astronomical observatories and performed brain surgery. I thought of the colored pictures in my grade school history books. Columbus striding up the beach in his leotards and feathered hat. A gang of wild-haired red men in loin clothes, scattering in front of him like rabbits. What a joke. Our true first names are Indian names, Esteban said. You couldn't even pronounce them. We chose Spanish names when we moved to the city. I was amazed. So Esperanza is bilingual? What do they call it? Trilingual? I knew that Esperanza spoke some English too, but it was hard to say how much since she spoke it so rarely. One time I admired a little gold medallion she always wore around her neck, and she said with an accent but plainly enough, "That is Saint Christopher, guardian saint of refugees." I would have been no more surprised if Saint Christopher himself had spoken. Christopher was a sweet-faced saint. He looked like a lot, he, he looked a lot like Stephen Foster, who I suppose you could say was a guardian saint of Kentucky. At least he wrote the state song. I chose a new name for myself too when I left home, I said to Esteban. We all have that in common. You did? What was it before? I made a face. Marietta. He laughed. It's not so bad. It's a town in Georgia where Mama's and my father's car broke down once. I guess when they were on their way to Florida. They never made it. They stayed in a motel and made me instead. What a romantic story. Not really. That was a mistake. Well, not really a mistake, according to Mama, but an accident. A mistake, I guess, is when you regret it later. And they didn't. Mama didn't. That's all that counts in my case. So Pampa went on to Florida? Or wherever. Esperanza also grew up without her father. Their circumstances were different, of course. In the back seat, Esperanza was stroking Turtle's hair and singing to her quietly in a high, unearthly voice. I had heard enough Spanish to understand that the way her voice was dipping and gliding through the words was more foreign than that. I remembered Esteban's yodely songs the day of our first picnic. They had to have been Mayan songs, not Spanish. Songs older than Christopher Columbus, maybe older than Christopher the Saint. I wondered if, when they still had Ismin, they had sung to her in both languages. I think how languages could accumulate in a family in a country like that. When I thought of Guatemala, I imagined a storybook place. Jungles full of long-tailed birds, women wearing rainbow-threaded dresses. But of course, there was more to the picture. Police everywhere, always. Whole villages of Indian forces, to move again and again. As soon as they planted their crops, Estevan said, the police would come and set their houses and fields on fire and make them move again. The strategy was to wear them down so they'd be too tired or too hungry to fight back. Turtle had fallen asleep with her head in Esperanza's lap. What's with everybody's... What's with everybody always trying to get rid of the Indians, I said, not really asking for an answer. I thought again of the history book pictures. Astronomers and brain surgeons. They should have done brain surgery on Christopher Columbus while they had a chance. After a while, Esperanza said, what I really hate is not belonging in any place. To be unwanted everywhere. I thought of my Cherokee great-grandfather, his people who believed God lived in the trees in that empty Oklahoma plain. They were driven to like livestock. But then even the Cherokee Nation was someplace. You know what really gets me? I asked him. How people call you illegals. That just makes me mad. I don't know how you can stand it. A human being can be good, or bad, or right, or wrong. Maybe. But how can you say a person's illegal? I don't know. You tell me. You just can't, I said. That's all there is to it. On the second day, we got into flatlands. The Texas Panhandle on the western and then western Oklahoma stretched out all around us like a colossal pancake. There was no way of judging where you were against where you were going, and as a consequence, you tended to start feeling you were struck out there, rolling in wheels, and on some tricky prairie treadmill. Esteban, who had apparently spent some time on a ship, said it reminded him of the ocean. He knew a Spanish word for the kind of mental sickness you get from seeing too much horizon. Esperanza seemed stunned at first, then a little scared. She asked Esteban, who translated for me, whether or not we were near Washington. I assured her we weren't, and asked what made her think so. She said she thought they might build the president's palace in a place like this, so that if anyone came after him, his guards would spot them off a long way. To keep ourselves from going crazy with boredom, we tried to think of word games. I told about the secretary named Jewel with a son who sees things backwards, and we tried to think of words he would like. Esperanza thought of Allah, which means we. Esteban knew whole sentences, and some in Spanish and some in English. The English ones were a man, a plan, a canal, Panama, which he said was a typical gringo way of looking at the endeavor. And able was I saw Elba, which was what Napoleon supposedly said when he was sent into exile. I hadn't known before then where or what Elba was. I had a vague idea that it was a kind of toast. Turtle was the only one of us who didn't seem perturbed by the landscape. She told Esperanza a kind of long-going story, which lasted for hundreds of miles and sounded like a vegetarian version of Aesop's fables. And when she ran out of stories, she played with her baby doll. The doll was a hand-me-down from Maddie's. It came with a pair of red checkered pajamas, complete with regular-sized shirt buttons, that someone had apparently sewn by hand. Turtle adored the doll and had named it, with no help from anyone, Shirley Poppy. We passed by Oklahoma City and headed north on I-35, reversing the route I had taken through Oklahoma the first time.